sessió i respecteu les normes sanitàries de rentat de mans i distància interpersonal. En acabar, resteu al vostre seient fins que l'organització us indiqui l'ordre de sortida. Moltes gràcies.
Hola, molt bon vespre a tothom. Moltes gràcies a tots per ser aquí i també als que esteu connectats online de manera virtual. En primer lloc, volia agrair al MOT que hagi triat la novel·la El Museu de l'Amor Modern, escrita per Heather Rose i publicada per l'editorial Les Hores, perquè sigui el punt de conversa i el punt de partida per reflexionar sobre com l'art pot arribar a transformar i a impactar l'individu. Primer de tot, saludaré breument a l'Àngels Moreno, que ens acompanyarà avui en aquesta conversa. I també volia saludar a la Heather Rose de manera breu, que està connectada des d'Austràlia. Allà són les 6 del matí. Good morning, Heather. Thank you for being with us so early.
Good evening, everybody. It's so beautiful to be part of MOT. Thank you.
Molt bé, doncs la Heather Rose va néixer a Austràlia, ella té 58 anys, és una dona molt polifacètica, ha escrit 8 novel·les, 5 d'elles dedicades a públic adult i 3 dedicades a públic infantil i juvenil, i, com deia, és molt polifacètica, ha escrit narrativa de ficció, realisme màgic, ficció policíaca, ficció política i també fins i tot fantasia. És també una dona molt coneguda a Tasmània, on viu, perquè també és una gran dona de negocis allà, sobretot en els àmbits de la publicitat, i és realment una escriptora, dona de negocis, molt coneguda a l'illa de Tasmània. Aquesta novel·la, El Museu de l'Amor Modern, és la seva quarta novel·la i és la que ha estat més internacional. És la que ha estat traduïda fins ara a 10 llengües. Nosaltres, en llengua catalana, vam ser els primers a publicar-les en català, així que estem contents d'aquest gran privilegi que vam poder tenir, i ha rebut diferents reconeixements, entre ells l'Stella Prize, que és el premi més important que es dona a Austràlia a les escriptores dones, i també el Christina Stead Prize, que és un premi molt rellevant també d'Austràlia. També, si coneixeu l'International Dublin Literary Award, que és un premi que donen als bibliotecaris de tot el món i que és dels més prestigiosos, doncs aquesta novel·la també va ser nominada com a finalista dintre d'aquesta llista curta de seleccions. També la novel·la actualment s'està treballant per ser portada al teatre i al cinema a Austràlia, així que esperem que ben aviat aquest estiu, si no recordo malament, segurament ja es podrem veure com segueix el camí, que ha començat sent una novel·la i veiem cap a on ens porta. D'altra banda, també m'acompanya Àngels Moreno, que ella és escriptora, metgessa i periodista. Ha publicat diversos llibres de poesia, entre ells Clarobscur, Extrema alegoria, L'usurpador o L'Agulla, i ha rebut el Premi de Literatura Breu de Mislata i el 19è Premi de Poesia Maria Sempre. Alguns dels seus poemes també han estat traduïts i inclosos en antologies que s'han traduït a altres idiomes. I ha treballat també amb l'artista plàstica Teresa Vallpalou, també amb el pintor Joan Claret i amb les artistes Anna Llimós i Jordi Pagès. Ella és escriptora, periodista, ha col·laborat amb diverses revistes com Caràcters o Reduccions o la revista Això, i actualment escriu articles sobre medicina, art, teatre i representació al temps de les arts. I jo soc la Maria Sempre, editora de Les Hores. Bé, un cop fetes aquestes presentacions, només volia molt breument comentar per què vam decidir publicar aquesta novel·la, que, com dèiem, és una gran reflexió al voltant de la importància de l'art en la vida quotidiana i com l'art, de quina manera, pot arribar a transformar l'individu i la societat. En aquesta novel·la, el protagonista principal és l'Arki Levin, és un compositor de bandes sonores de pel·lícules que té més de al voltant de 60 anys i que per raons diverses ha hagut de separar-se de la seva dona. No sabem ben bé per què, però s'ha produït un distanciament amb ella i això l'ha portat a ella a un col·lapse creatiu absolutament i no troba, no té inspiració per seguir entregant les feines a temps i tot allò que ha de dur a terme. En aquest context, ell viu a Nova York, començarà un passeig un bon matí i toparà de manera casual, entrarà al MoMA, al Museu d'Art Modern de Nova York, i toparà amb una performance que s'està duent a terme, que és The Artist is Present, de l'artista performer Marina Abramovic. Aquest el nostre personatge toparà amb aquesta performance i quedarà impactat per ella i tornarà dia rere dia a veure què és això que s'està produint a l'atri del MoMA. Aquesta performance és una performance real que es va produir l'any 2010, a la qual l'artista Marina Abramovic, a l'atri del MoMA, es va establir un quadrat, tot un perímetre quadrat, i al mig hi havia una taula i dues cadires. La Marina Abramovic seia una cadira immòbil, absolutament, des de les 10 del matí que obrien el MoMA fins a les 6 de la tarda. Ella no es movia, no s'aixecava, no menjava, no bevia, estava absolutament immòbil. I els visitants d'aquesta performance únicament s'asseien davant seu i la miraven als ulls. No es podrien dirigir amb ella, no la podien tocar, únicament es podien mirar i podien estar tot el temps que ells volguessin. La Marina Abramovic va fer aquest exercici durant 75 dies, 700 hores. I figura que el nostre protagonista, al topar amb aquesta performance, queda encisat amb el magnetisme d'aquesta dona i allò que s'està produint allà i torna dia rere dia. En aquest tornar, en aquest MoMA, coneixerà altres persones que, com ell, han quedat encisats amb allò que s'està produint allà i veurem quina és l'evolució i què succeeix realment amb aquests personatges. La Heather Rose, ella també, va seure amb la Marina Abramovic, que ens ho explicarà ja més tard, i això va acabar de ser el desencadenant per acabar d'escriure aquesta novel·la tal com és ara. Ella ja havia començat a escriure coses sobre aquesta artista perquè li interessava molt, però la forma que va acabar de donar el gir va acabar sent el fet de seure amb ella. Per qui no coneixeu la Marina Abramovic, ella és una dona que té més de 75 anys. Als anys 70 va començar a fer unes performances molt provocadores, molt radicals i molt violentes, i realment és com la icona, com la mare dels artistes performancers. Ella sempre ha reflexionat sobre la relació entre l'artista i l'audiència, els límits del cos, i també tot el que seria la identitat individual i col·lectiva. Són els temes que més l'han preocupat. Com deia, aquesta novel·la ens ha interessat principalment per la gran reflexió que fa sobre l'art i com aquest pot impactar a l'individu, i també perquè ens va semblar que fa grans preguntes. Per què serveix l'art a la vida quotidiana? És important com ens afecta i com no? I també ens va semblar una molt bona mostra de com la interrelació entre les diferents arts dona un resultat que és molt més que la suma de les seves parts. En aquest cas, trobem un músic, que és el compositor, el principal de la nostra novel·la, trobem també l'artista, Marina Abramovic, i trobem també la gran escriptura i la gran composició narrativa que arriba a fer Heather Rose amb aquests personatges. Un element molt important de la novel·la, i que Heather Rose va demanar permís a Abramovic, és que la Marina Abramovic és alhora un personatge d'aquesta novel·la. És a dir, veiem també què pensa la Marina Abramovic i què fa al llarg d'aquests 75 dies en què es produeix aquesta història. Però alhora també, de manera, crec, molt reeixida, l'autora ens comença a introduir, ens explica tota l'evolució artista de la Marina Abramovic, per què comença amb aquestes coses tan radicals i violentes i per què acaba amb aquesta quietud externament immòbil, per què? I alhora aprofita per explicar-nos tot el món de les performances, tot l'art de les performances. Normalment, la majoria de nosaltres sabem alguna cosa de pintura, alguna cosa d'escultura, alguna cosa de teatre, però realment l'art de la performance és un art que ens queda molt lluny a tots nosaltres. Aquest llibre, des de la narrativa, des de la ficció, perquè nosaltres estem llegint què li passa a l'Arquilevin i què li passa als altres personatges, què els va succeint, però alhora ens està explicant i ens està introduint en tot el món de les performances i de la vida i la biografia i l'evolució artística de la Marina Abramovic, de manera que ens va semblar que era un molt bon exemple de fusió entre diferents arts. Un altre element que em sembla molt interessant de la novel·la seria una veu que també apareix i que també avui parlarem d'ella, que és la veu de la inspiració. En algun moment d'aquesta novel·la apareix aquella musa que dona el toc a l'artista perquè rebi la inspiració que tot artista busca i necessita. I a part de parlar d'aquests temes que he comentat fins ara, realment la novel·la ja pròpiament dita és una gran reflexió de la solitud de l'home actual, en el temps actual, de l'accelerada velocitat del món en el que vivim i també de la necessitat de connectar amb els altres i de trobar un sentit una mica a aquest món. Així que és un llibre, com veieu, que gairebé ho toca tot i ho explica tot. I ara donaré pas ja a l'Àngels perquè ens expliqui una mica més en profunditat les reflexions al voltant de Marina Abramovic i la novel·la de Heather Rose.
Bona nit a tothom. Per mi és un plaer compartir Conversa amb tots vosaltres, amb Heather Rose i amb Maria Sempre, editora de les hores. Ai, és que... Perdó. M'ha tocat una mica la part difícil de la xerrada d'avui, que és trobar els punts de contacte entre l'art i la literatura. Realment no és fàcil. Hi ha molts autors que han parlat sobre les connexions entre art i literatura, no només des del punt de vista de la literatura, sinó des de la història de l'art i de la filosofia. I llavors jo penso que més que trobar aquelles diferències, perquè és molt notable que llegir no és com contemplar, penso que la literatura i l'art tenen molt a veure amb la mirada. La mirada és fonamental tant per iniciar un procés de creació literari com un procés de creació pictòric, cinematogràfic, teatral, etc. I penso que un dels punts nuclears de la novel·la de la Heather és aquest, la mirada. Com els personatges es veuen interpel·lats per una persona que seu enmig d'una ciutat bulliciosa com pot ser Nova York i comencen un procés de pensament cap a si mateixos i de reflexió de tot allò que els passa de manera quotidiana i també pensaments de l'existència mateixa, de la vida mateixa. La mirada seria aquell punt a partir del qual no només l'art i la literatura parteixen, sinó en general tota l'experiència de l'art i l'experiència creativa. I una mica volia parlar sobre Marina Abramovic, abans de donar-li veu a Heather i comentar coses de la novel·la. Marina Abramovic neix a Belgrad l'any 46 i com bé ha explicat la Maria, el seu art fonamentalment requereix i demana l'experimentació dels límits del cos i de la ment. I com bé sabeu, si coneixeu la seva obra, ella sempre ha posat en risc el seu cos, ha optat per una visió de l'art que va enllà de la representació mateixa, que va enllà de totes les possibilitats que el cos permet, amb tota aquella experimentació que ella va confegir a partir sobretot de la seva experiència a Austràlia i en altres països, de quedar-se muda en silenci davant de l'altre i llavors que en aquest silenci l'obra mateixa esdevingui, l'obra mateixa tingui lloc. L'interès de la performance és que crec que és profundament literaturitzable, perquè la performance és llibertat absoluta, d'acord? La performance és aquella obra d'art que esdevé la col·lectivitat, que no només l'artista és important, sinó també el públic és important i que tant públic com artista fan possible l'obra. La performance indaga els límits de la veritat i de la ficció. Una cosa molt interessant que la pròpia Marina Abramovic comenta a la seva biografia, que la podeu trobar en castellà en l'editorial Malpaso, es diu Derribando muros. Ella explica com la performance és, diguéssim, una passa més enllà dels límits de la representació i com podia posar-se en comunicació amb el públic, com podia, amb el seu propi cos, situant-se en l'escena, deixar que tot l'ambient la marés, que tot l'ambient influís sobre ella i tot l'ambient, totes les persones que l'estan contemplant estan figurant amb ella a l'escenari. Una cosa també molt important de la performance és, com he dit, això dels límits de la ficció i de la veritat. Es es distingeix de l'obra de teatre perquè mentre que en l'obra de teatre ella es talla amb un ganivet i la sang seria ficció, el ganivet seria ficció, en la performance res no és ficció. Tot de la performance és veritat. I el fet que la performance esdevingui en un espai determinat la constitueix amb objecte artístic. Això ho menciona Susana Portell en el pròleg d'aquesta novel·la, que la performance té a veure amb aquella relació, aquella mixtura entre cerimònia i rutina. I és el que ocorre amb a l'artista és present, la performance sobre la qual tracta la novel·la, que és aquella escena que ben bé podria ocórrer a la quotidianitat, però que en ser extreta del seu ambient natural i ser col·locada enmig d'un museu queda erigida com a objecte artístic. I bé, penso que en aquest sentit, en aquesta multiplicitat d'interpretacions que no només aquesta performance d'Abramovic, sinó en general l'art de la performance permet, això ho fa profundament comunicable amb la literatura i molt té la capacitat de ser escrit. I ara m'agradaria, per donar-li veu a Heather, que ens expliqués una mica com va ser la seva experiència de seure davant Marina Abramovic.
Thank you, Àngels and Maria. It's wonderful to be here with you both, and to everyone in the audience, hello. And I'm sorry I can't speak in Catalan, but I'm very appreciative of being translated. So it's 2010, and the performance is in the atrium at the MoMA in New York, the Museum of Modern Art. And I arrived on a plane from Australia. It's a long way from Tasmania, so it probably took 32 hours or something like that altogether. And I dropped my bag at the hotel. To those who know it, I was staying at the famous Chelsea Hotel of Leonard Cohen fame and all sorts of other dubious people. And I dropped my bags and I went straight to the gallery. And I ran up the stairs and came into the atrium, and there it is. It's got 4 floodlights. Marina is inside, as you said, Àngels, a square that's been taped off. There's a blonde wood table and chairs, 2 chairs, and Marina is in a long red dress, and she has her hair, she has long dark hair that's pulled round to one side in a ponytail across her chest, and she's in a gaze, what she calls the gaze. She's in eye contact with the person sitting opposite her in the chair, and nobody's moving. They're just sitting there in eye contact with each other. And around the outside, there are all sorts of people. There are mothers with prams and little children and bigger children, and people are sitting, people are standing, people are talking, people are watching. People are really, really absorbed in this performance. So I joined the queue and I waited, and everyone can sit for as long as they like. So some people sat a whole day, so everyone in the queue beyond them didn't get to sit. So that afternoon I didn't get to sit, I got to watch. And the next day I got back there early, I got in the queue early, and I eventually got to the front of the queue, and there's a guard at the head of the queue who tells you that you must cross the floor, sit on the chair. Ms. Abramovic will raise her eyes when she's ready, and you are to sit in the gaze with her. You're not to speak to her. And as soon as I stepped across that white line into the performance space, I realised it was a piece of theatre as well as a piece of art. And suddenly the people around the outside were not observers, they were they felt like a theatrical audience. They felt like they were watching a performance of two human beings. And I sat down on the chair and realised that the chair was fixed to the floor, so you couldn't move it even if you wanted to. And then, of course, the great moment that is both utterly electrifying but also a little bit terrifying is when Marina lifts her gaze and looks straight at me. And, you know, I almost instantly realised she was in a lot of pain. Her eyes were a little bit wet. She'd been sitting by then, it was April, so she'd probably been sitting every day for 3 weeks. And in writing the book, I did practice this to see what happens to the body. And it's really painful to sit that still for long periods of time. And so that was interesting to realise that this wasn't just something that looked beautiful and had attracted an enormous amount of people. This was a rite. This was a ceremony of some sort. And I think you explained that so beautifully, Àngels, that you talk about ceremony and routine. I mean, in some ways, sitting on a chair is just an everyday human routine. But this was something quite out of the ordinary. And then, of course, the other part happened. And this happened every time I sat. I sat 4 times over the 3 weeks I was there. And very quickly, the audience sound dropped away, and it was all, and the space went right up to the atrium, so you could see the skylight in the MoMA. It's not like that anymore. It was the way it was constructed at the time, and I suddenly found myself going to a really trance-like experience of traveling. I was traveling. I have spent a lot of time in America through my 20s. When I was younger, I was involved in Native American ritual, and it was a very serious commitment of mine for 4 years. And it was the closest I'd come to that same kind of trance-like experience brought on by ritual, which was extremely strange because I was in a totally secular environment of an art gallery. And I found myself having conversations with Marina Abramovich, and there was something deeply familiar about the experience of walking with her. And I remember when I came back out, at some point I arrived back in the present moment, and I remember I just sort of dropped my head and she dropped her head, and I realised it was over. I don't know where I'd been, but it was over. And I got up and I walked back to beyond the square, and the next person sat down opposite Marina. And I went to the back of the gallery and considered what had happened, and had no explanation. Yeah, like many spiritual experiences, I had no practical or scientific or just ordinary explanation for it. And when I went home later that night, I realised that the photographer, Marco Anelli, who's also a character in the book and agreed to be himself in the book, he takes photos of everyone that sits with Marina, but they are time-stamped. And if you'd asked me afterwards how long I had sat with her that first time, I might have said 12, 15 minutes. But instead it was 46 minutes. And every single time that happened, every time I sat, I completely lost time. I had very strange conversations, either with Marina or with some other sense of life that occurred. And every single time I came away thinking that wasn't normal.
Molt bé. Has comentat també que tu coneixies abans la Marina Abramovic i havies seguit una mica la seva evolució artística, però que va ser en aquest moment quan vas seure que vas decidir donar la forma que té actualment la novel·la. I la pregunta seria una mica què vas voler compartir d'aquesta experiència amb el lector, què és el que volies transmetre amb el teu text?
Well, the novel started in an art gallery. So I was in the city of Melbourne in Australia, and I was at a gallery that I go to a lot called the National Gallery of Victoria. And I wandered in, I had been to see the Dutch Masters. It was a big show in Melbourne. And then I walked into another part of the gallery and saw a black and white photograph of a table with a white tablecloth on it and some items. I couldn't see what they were, but the little piece beside it, the photograph said, Marina Abramovich, 1946 dash, well-known performance artist. This piece is rhythm 0. She put 72 items on a table and invited the audience in the gallery to do whatever they wanted to her. And so she was passive for 6 hours, and they had, the things on the table were a rose, a bottle of olive oil, a loaf of bread, but it was also chains and a whip and a gun and a bullet. And over the course, so this is what it says, this is the little description. And then it says, Marina Abramovich is also known for a piece called The Great Walk, where she and her partner Ulay walked from either end of the Great Wall of China to meet in the middle and say goodbye at the end of their relationship. And I read that and I thought, who does that? Who does that? Who is so brave that they can put 72 items on a table and be entirely passive for 6 hours while people do whatever they want to her with them, but also so romantic that she felt the need to make this incredible declaration at the end of a relationship to make it complete. And then I thought, that's a character for a book. So I always start with character. That's what really interests me in writing. And so I couldn't find very much about Marina Abramovich online. It was 2005. I could find things in Italian, I could find things in Dutch, but I don't read either of those languages. And I thought, I'll just have to make it up, which is what we novelists do, yeah? So I learned a little bit about some of the early performances that she'd done, but there was very little. And then in 2008, a wonderful person here, a philanthropist really, in Tasmania we have our very own kind of Guggenheim. It's called MONA, M-O-N-A, the Museum of Old and New Art. And it's a private gallery, and the man who started it is a man called David Walsh. He made a lot of money doing all sorts of extraordinary things. He's got a brilliant mathematical brain, and he was building this gallery. And I heard about the fact that he had a library, and at the time the whole gallery was in a huge warehouse. So I went and met the librarian, and I started to tell her about this idea I had, and she said, "Oh, that sounds like Marina Abramovich." And it was the first time I'd ever heard anyone else say her name. And she said, "Oh yes, David," who's the owner of the gallery, "David has all Marina's books, and we have several of her pieces." And so some videos of hers, some photographs, memorabilia and all sorts of things. And so suddenly I'm in a cupboard in this warehouse, and I'm literally in the cupboard. I'm in a store cupboard that is just big enough for me to put a chair up against a sort of bench. And I've got cardboard boxes full of books, and I'm going through them, finding the books about Marina Abramovich. And that was where I started to get a real sense of the scope of her life and the scope of her art. And so by the time I got to 2010 and went to New York, I already had a character who was seated in a restaurant, eating alone, and the characters, she didn't know this, the character, but this would be her last meal. The next day she was going to give her final performance, and she wouldn't survive it. And so the people who are coming to sit opposite her at this dining table are ghosts and lovers, ex-lovers, people who've been powerful in her life. And what I was trying to do was express how a woman responds to the artistic life. I wanted to express what it is to live with a burning desire to be an artist of some sort, but also to live with the fragility of the emotional landscape of being a woman, and with the very, very difficult choices that women have so often had to make about how we spend our time. And so much of that is dominated, for those of us who become mothers, by those years of parenting when so much creativity could be possible. And indeed, many women make the choice not to have children if they want to be artists, and they've done that in the past too. But, what would it take to really give oneself to art to the extent that you would eliminate all those other life choices because you are determined to use your body as an instrument for transcendence of some sort through art in a way that would inspire other people to also consider that life is a transcendent experience. And so that's where I went to that's where I was at with the book when I went to New York. And then sitting opposite Marina, I realised I could not fictionalise her. She was too powerful. The experience was too intense. Nothing made any sense suddenly in terms of fictionalising her life either. And so I had already made an appointment to see her gallerist and curator, Sean Kelly. And I went to that meeting and I said to him, do you think Miss Abramovich would agree to be herself in the book? And he said, write her a letter, ask her. And I did, and she, without any caveats, with no rules or restrictions, said yes, because she's a very brave person. And so she gave this, pretty much unknown novelist from from Tasmania, far end of the world, the opportunity to represent her in literature. And it was such the hard thing was, for those of you who are novelists and writers in the audience, of course, it's be careful what you wish for, because suddenly I was charged with this enormous responsibility of representing this woman who is still alive. It's a very powerful person, a really rich, deep person. And I was in charge of representing her in literature. And then Marco Anelli, as I said, the photographer, agreed to be himself, and also David Baleano, who was Marina's assistant at the time. And this strange thing happened. And Àngels, you referred to this, where it's both real and it's not real. It's fiction and it's truth. So then what started to be so much more powerful in the novel was this story of Archie and Lydia, and this opportunity to explore love, which of course is what art really is in all sorts of forms, but commitment and grief and creativity. And so this and of course the muse was such a big part of that, because the muse, for those of you who haven't read the book, the story is really told by a muse that is an eternal creature, and their job is to assist artists in their creative process, to bear witness, to be a supportive influence, but also without any real power to make that person do anything other than to be the person who bears witness, which is such a powerful thing to do. And so that muse talks about her, well, I think of her as a her, but she, of course there's no gender. She has spent lifetimes and eons supporting women artists. And so she's supported men too. She's supporting Archie. She's Archie's muse as well as Marina's. And so her perspective on how women have responded to art and the challenges of becoming artists was such a huge exploration for me, and it was an enormous amount of research. But it made me very, very sad writing the book. The more I researched how women have been perceived as artists, the opportunities we've had and not had, the way we're still so vastly underrepresented in galleries, the way that so many women writers are, when we think of the great writers and we talk of genius, we often refer to male writers. And yet if we talk about the books that have really touched our hearts and stay with us over the course of our lifetime, often those books are written by women. So we still have a very gendered response to art, I think, and it would be wonderful to see that transform, in coming generations.
A mi, Heather, hi ha una cosa que m'agrada molt, no?, de tot això que dius de la teva novel·la, i és la posició de la dona, no? Concretament, tot el sacrifici, com exemplifiques el sacrifici que Lídia, la dona d'Arqui, fa per la carrera d'ell, no? I com hi ha al llarg de la història tantes dones que han sigut silenciades o que la seva obra ha estat tapada senzillament perquè l'artista és ell, no? I ell és qui ha de relluir, i l'obra de la dona sempre queda en un segon pla en relació a l'obra de l'home que és l'artista, no? En canvi, la dona sempre està una mica condemnada a tot això de tenir cura de l'altre, a ser condescendent, a aquesta cosa de dedicar-se sempre i tenir responsabilitat sobre els altres. Hi ha una altra cosa que volia remarcar, i és que com mostres a la novel·la que el fet de trobar-se amb Marina, no necessàriament per seure davant d'ella, sinó pel fet de contemplar l'escena que està passant, com tot això engega una maquinària de records i una maquinària de fer aquest tipus de reflexions sobre la pròpia vida i sobre la relació que té amb l'amor. Per exemple, Arqui, què ha de fer, si acompanya la dona a la seva malaltia, si ha de fer ell que ella diu que és deixar-ho tot i separar-se perquè ell pugui seguir la seva carrera que està però en un moment de bloqueig creatiu que no tira endavant, no? Però sempre hi ha aquest element femení que està simbolitzat per Jane Miller, que és aquesta professora d'Història de l'Art. A mi crec que és el personatge que més m'agrada de la novel·la perquè és com entranyable, però alhora és molt dura també, com podria ser la mateixa Abramovich. I és un dels personatges que impulsa una mica a Arqui a seure davant de Marina i a diguéssim, fer fora tots aquells fantasmes, no? És a dir, a fer una espècie de catarsi seient amb Marina Abramovich i tenir una experiència artística. I la tercera cosa que volia apuntar, això que has dit al principi, sobre la teva pròpia experiència seient amb Marina, jo sentia una mica d'enveja de quina pena no haver pogut estar al 2010 amb ella, perquè realment quan llegia la teva novel·la, quan llegia la seva biografia, quan llegia coses i la mirava també en vídeo en YouTube, dic, ostres, és que deu ser fascinant tenir contacte amb aquesta persona, és totalment màgica, totalment fora de sèrie, i com vivia l'art, crec que ho he esmentat al principi, com una absoluta entrega, com un sacrifici fins i tot, amb allò de passar tantes hores asseguda, en dejú fins i tot, com denota, i ella ho explica a la seva biografia, que per a ella l'art està per sobre de tot. I és això que has comentat abans de rebutjar tenir fills, perquè ella està plenament dedicada a aquesta passió, que no només és un gust, no només és una pulsió, va molt més enllà, és una transcendència, és el sentit de la seva vida. I clar, tota la resta de circumstàncies de la vida l'entretindrien d'aquest propòsit últim que és l'art. Propòsit que a més condemna una mica la dona amb aquesta espècie de denostació, de crítica, perquè clar, al cap i a la fi, quan ets una dona jove pots fer-ho, això de dedicar-te a l'art, de no pensar en el temps, però clar, a mesura que vas fent anys comença a haver una espècie de marca sobre la dona que decideix deixar-ho tot i dedicar-se a l'art. I aquesta marca encara persisteix, sobretot quan una dona comença a fer-se gran i persisteix en la seva idea de dedicar-se a l'art, no? I bé, és una de les reivindicacions del feminisme avui en dia. I bé, jo volia preguntar-te, Heather, si per tu també l'escriptura té relació amb la catarsi, com així ho era per a l'art per a Marina Abramovic.
Oh, that's such a big question, Àngels. Yes, probably. Probably it is a cathartic experience, I think. I mean, for me, ever since I was quite young, I knew I wanted to be a writer really early in my life. I started reading when I was about 3 years old, and when I was 6 years old, my father, we didn't have very many books at home. I grew up in quite, a family of 4 children, and it was a very simple existence. I'm here in Tasmania at the far end of the world, and my dad would take me to the library every weekend, and when I was 6, he did this extraordinary thing. He took me from the children's section across into the adult section of the library, and he pulled a tiny little slender volume off the shelf and handed it to me, and it was The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And I remember it took me, he had to renew it twice for me, and for those of you who know it, it's maybe 120 pages at most, and so I'm young and I'm slow at reading at that stage, but it took me 6 weeks to read it, and it broke my heart. I had never read a story with an unhappy ending before, and I remember thinking at the end, oh, a book doesn't just take you places. This was Cuba. Yeah, I didn't ever know that part of the world before, but it also can make you feel things. And I remember thinking that was the sort of writer I wanted to be. And so I then began writing. I've kept journals and notebooks all my life. And, I think writing is a way of me processing the world. If I don't write, my head gets very busy. And I used to find I have 3 children who are now adults and all grown up, but through the years when I was very intensely mothering, I'd find myself with these scenes and dialogue and characters just talking to me, and I just have to go and write it down. And so I wrote all my novels, including much of the museum, almost all of the Museum of Modern Love. I wrote them all after 9 o'clock at night. And it was definitely catharsis to get all those characters and dialogue and thoughts and explorations out of my head. And it was also delight. It was also delight because it's the thing that is my inspiration in life, is to assess the human condition and filter that into a world that readers can connect with. And that's been such a privilege to have that opportunity to live life that way and to see life that way and to listen to life through that as well. Because, my children tell me that it's kind of crazy that I talk about my characters as visiting me, and they stay with me for years. And I remember the muse in the Museum of Modern Love. I remember at the end when I'd finally finished the book, and the last thing that came was the title. And I remember looking into the corner of the room and saying, look, if there is a muse that looks after me as a writer, then thank you for being so patient, because this book took 11 years to write. And yes, there was a lot of catharsis in that time, and there was a lot of upheaval in my life, and there were some, intense stretches of ill health. And so those sort of things became part of what occurs in the book, of course, because you can't separate your art from your heart. That's how it works, like it's a way of filtering what you feel and how you interpret life, and then it flows through characters, and eventually, if we're lucky, it comes out as a book.
I també en un passatge de la novel·la, la Marina Abramovic diu que l'artista sempre fa grans preguntes a la societat i què és l'oxigen de la societat. I a alguna altra banda també ell ha dit que només li interessa aquell art que pot canviar la ideologia de la societat. Aleshores, la meva pregunta seria, creus que l'art sempre ha de ser transformador? I en aquest sentit també, en quina mesura creus que pot arribar a transformar l'individu? En aquest cas veiem com impacta una performance en uns personatges, però també la literatura. De quina manera és permeable i pot arribar a modificar la percepció de l'individu?
Yeah, I really loved when there's a moment in the book where and this literally happens. So often the dialogue and the people that show up in the book that are observing Marina's performance, that was taken from real things that I overheard. And this man was standing behind me and he was saying, this isn't art. This isn't art. She's just sitting on a chair. Like, what? That's not art. And his partner was saying, but of course it's art. It's in an art gallery, and it's Marina Abramovic, and this is what she does. She's a performance artist, and he's going, this won't be what will save the world. What is this thing? It's not making a contribution. It will never make a contribution that will save anyone or save anything. And they wandered off, and I just wanted to turn around and say to him exactly what Jane says. I think art saves people all the time. And I think that it doesn't have to be a transcendent experience. I mean, there are many, many magnificent paintings in the world, yes? And I think the average we spend looking at a painting in an art gallery is something like 15 seconds. Even if it's a Van Gogh or a Renoir, and I don't think they have to be transformative. I mean, there's a lot of modern art that breaks some of those boundaries about what art is and what art isn't, and maybe sometimes those have the opportunity to be more engaging than an oil painting is to some people. But I think that the reason we connect with art and why hundreds of thousands of people will go to see Van Gogh's Sunflowers, for example, is because it moves something in us. And we might not call it transcendence, and we might not have any great epiphany, but it helps us understand our experience of being human in some way, to delight in the particular or the familiar shown back to us through the eyes of someone else, and someone who's incredibly good at their craft, because the craft is a huge part of it, and it's often the thing we don't consider, how hard it is to become good at anything in the world. It's really hard to become good at things, and a lifetime isn't a very long time to become good at something. So I love that even though we might not think about it, we sense that this has been a devotion. It is a devotion to live as an artist. And no, we don't all do transcendent art. And many of us, I love to dabble with paint too. I'll never be good at it. It doesn't matter. It's not what I've chosen to do with my life, but I love the pleasure of paint. And I think that's where art saves us. We don't have to be good at it for it to work as a healing mechanism, to work as an intuitive and responsive mechanism to things that are going on in our lives. It's a way of acknowledging that we are living in this mystery called life, and there are ways we seek to converse with that mystery, and some of us become very good at reflecting that mystery back in magnificent forms and mischievous forms and funny forms and delightful forms and highly entertaining forms. And, I don't distinguish between great paintings and great movies and great music and and great theatre and great dance and great literature. They're all a response to the human condition, and it's just that it comes in different ways for different people.
M'agrada això, Heather, l'art sense gradació, sense jerarquies, no? Perquè una mica és això que comentes, que potser no és tant una classificació sobre quines són les més grans obres d'art, quines són les grans pel·lícules, sinó sincerament com la mirada és capaç de quedar atrapada amb allò, no? I llavors generar un canvi dintre de la persona que està contemplant. A mi, jo tinc apuntades algunes frases de la teva novel·la, en això que parlàvem de la catarsi. M'agrada quan parlant sobre Arc i Levin, tu escrius: per compondre li cal l'empantanegament de somnis trencats. Perquè està atrapat en la roda dels records. Vull dir, quina és la vinculació de l'art amb la melangia, amb aquest estat interior que propulsa. És a dir, sempre necessàriament ha d'haver algun trauma, algun problema que sigui, diguéssim, el tret de sortida d'una obra.
Ooh, such a good question too. I do think a lot of artists come from a sort of sacred wound. I think that they do. I think that I mean, some people are just happy artists, yeah? Some people don't have childhood trauma and they breeze through life, and they're probably, really lucky, really lucky. But I don't know very many of those that are artists. I don't. And in fact, I have friends in all sorts of fields of art, and some of them are highly accomplished, and most of them draw from a certain sort of pain, I think. I mean, they might not even identify it that way, but I think a lot of really great art, I mean, this is where you get that strange, we know a great deal of, we know many artists who have had addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addictions, Jackson Pollock, we could just list, and Hemingway himself, we could just go on and on looking at that relationship between addiction and art. And my sense has always been, I say to my students, I teach here in Tasmania and also online, and I say to my students, there's medication or there's meditation. Because if you're going to live a creative life, you have to be open. And to be open is courageous and it's vulnerable. And it can feel very scary to be open. But if you're not open, how will you ever communicate your heart? And your heart is what people want to see when you make a film, when you paint a picture, when you create a beautiful piece of dance. It's actually the sense that we're connecting not just with someone's mind, because of course that is there too. We sense their intelligence, we sense what's motivated them, what they're drawing from through the history of their art form and through the history of other art forms. There are so many things that come to play to arrive at a final piece of art in any form. But most importantly, it's how it makes us feel. And so if that person isn't willing to live a brave life and a life of inquiry and be willing to, to some extent live on the edges, because as artists, we do have to be quite solitary. And, I know there are collaborative art forms because, of course, film and theatre and dance, all of those are very collaborative forms by the time they reach us. But at first, it's just one person and their mind and their heart telling a story. And the more raw we can be in that, I think the more powerful the work. And so I'm not sure that it's, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily therapy to make art, but it's certainly an exploration born of things that have been difficult, I think, generally. And you know, we see that a lot with mental illness too, and art, and how that is a beautiful way of expressing a reality that the rest of us don't have an insight into, and what a gift that has been too. So it does play a very important role, and I think truly art saves people all the time.
De l'art que salva persones. Mira, pensava precisament en James Rhodes, que el músic, que en la seva biografia escriu que si no fos per la música a saber com hauria pogut acabar, no? Perquè estava molt enganxat a la droga i va ser la música l'element que el va treure de tot aquell món. És a dir, que el que sí que hi ha amb la tema novel·la és que tots els personatges d'alguna manera tenen algun conflicte a resoldre. I a més conflicte que es veu visible, no?, amb el contacte amb l'obra d'Abramovich. I a mi m'agradaria, perquè hi ha una diferència molt clara entre la posició d'Archie Levin, que li costa molt entrar, fins i tot amb els personatges masculins que presentes a la novel·la, que, doncs, com allò que mencionaves, que a tots els hi costa, no?, una mica de però això és art, i per què és art? I ella senzillament seu allà i sense, no ho consideren gran art, no? Però les dones, en canvi, es mostren més sensibles front a això. Hi ha un moment que Helaya Breen comenta a l'Arnold, comenta que ella està encarnant allà la posició com de l'heroïna, de la guerrera, no? I una mica que expliquessis la distinció de visions entre uns i altres.
Yeah, so isn't that interesting that Archie is one of those people who has a sacred wound, but he hasn't acknowledged it. And so he also has a sense of entitlement. He really believes that he ought to be much more famous than he is, and that he ought to have been acknowledged with Oscars for the best, soundtrack. And he's come to this point in his life where he now can no longer ignore his inner life. And his wife Lydia, who's unwell and is in this health facility and has stopped him from coming to see her, has basically created a crisis for him, because all his confidence was built around the life they had created together. And in a way, it was an illusion, because she held it together, as you said before. She held it together. And she's a famous architect. She's very famous in her own right. And so he's had to live with this woman who's also fragile. She's also fragile, but then he has never considered what her perspective is. He's never considered what it must be like to live with the challenges that Lydia has had to live with. And suddenly he's left in this bubble of loneliness, and he has no way of getting out. And then you have Helias, who is younger, and she's very, very beautiful and very accomplished, and she's, as you say, she's a powerful woman. Yeah, she's a powerful woman. And for her, she just wants to shake him and wake him up. And Helias completely understands her own inner pain. I couldn't put it all in the book, but Helias has a really interesting story back in Paris, and with her dad in Malta, and she was a really beautiful character to have there as this powerful woman of true freedom. Like, she's a free woman. She's a free-thinking, free-acting woman, but that's born of a great deal of hardship. And she sees that Archie has had so little hardship in his life. But the loss of his mother, the early death of his father, all sorts of aspects of Archie's life have gone unexplored. And perhaps that's why his music has never quite connected with so many people as he would have wished, because he doesn't know himself well enough yet. And in this book, we watch him go through this arc of sitting on the outside, watching the artist is present, watching Marina Abramovich, meeting some of the people who are also watching every day, and slowly, and he's so slow, isn't he? I didn't know if he would ever get there. I was like, I wonder if he'll actually have a moment of awakening. And then he's sitting on the Hudson one day, and it suddenly occurs to him that perhaps there was a sign that he missed somewhere that said, go this way. And I knew as soon as he had that thought that it was going to be all right, that this novel would actually have a resolution that would, well, I didn't know if it would be satisfying. I just knew that he was going to wake up.
Sí, bé, no? Al final seria això, no? Encarar-se amb les pors, no? Segons diu la Marina Abramovic, la fas en el teu llibre, diu encarar-se al que fa por per així evolucionar. És un camí personal, experimentar per evolucionar. L'error fa evolucionar. Si no arrisques i entres en nous territoris, no evoluciones. Jo recordo aquí també una mica les cartes a un jove poeta de Rainer Maria Rilke, que també li diu al jove escriptor que sempre es posi en el costat més difícil de l'escriptura, que tiri sempre pel camí més difícil, perquè realment sovint és el que ens fa transformar-nos, realment treure allò de dins que portem i perquè és per tal que es pugui realitzar. Molt bé, doncs, si us sembla bé, ara seria moment d'obrir un torn de preguntes. Si algú vol fer alguna pregunta a la Heather, a l'Àngels. Ningú s'anima? Doncs jo tenia una última pregunta per fer-li a la Heather, que suposo que molts de vosaltres potser també teniu la curiositat. Hi ha molts llibres que hem llegit, com aquest, del Museu de l'Amor Modern, fusionen diferents arts o parlen de diferents arts. Jo tinc, per exemple, Allò que vaig estimar, de la Siri Hasbel, que parla d'un artista, o El mapa i el territori, de Michael Houellebecq, que també parla de nou d'un pintor, o Thomas Bernhard, en aquest cas de la música, amb El malaguanyat, si l'heu llegit, i també una música constant, que a mi també em va agradar molt, de Vikram Seth, i li volia preguntar a la Heather si ella té algun llibre de referència en el qual s'hagi inspirat per acabar fent aquesta construcció que ha fet en aquest cas, o que hagi estat rellevant per ella, per intentar construir aquesta interrelació i aquesta fusió entre les diferents arts.
So I read a great deal, and I read very widely, and I mean, I really loved Haruki Murakami's recent novel, Killing Commendatore, and that's about art. In a way, it's about art. But I think the books that I've really loved that have taught me a great deal about art recently are books, Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, because it's actually about what imagination is. And I love looking at what's the seed, what's the beginning point, yeah? And so the same with Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. I really love that book, and I give it to my, I get my students to read it because it's about the creative process. And similarly, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. If you really learn to be present, then you almost certainly will be fostering your imagination. And, it's a paradox, that, really. And the same with Homo Deus. It really looks at the way we have imagined our lives. And when you realise that everything comes from imagination, our money comes from imagination, our whole economy, our society, the way we've created roles for men and women, it's all from imagination. It's all imagining a world. And I love those books, the books that expand my thinking about what is this thing called imagination? What is this thing that leads us to different forms of art? So, yeah, And those novels you've mentioned are great. I've read all of them. So, yeah, and I've really loved them. And there are many more I really want to read. I would love to read more biographies of artists too. So, you know, lots ahead. There's lots ahead.
Molt bé. I bé, ja per acabar, només et preguntaria en què estàs treballant i quan és la teva última novel·la, si ens pots fer 5 cèntims.
So the year before last, I published a political thriller in Australia, which has been a huge bestseller, called Bruny, Bruny. It's an island off the coast of Tasmania, so it's an island off an island off an island, and that's been very successful. But I literally yesterday, the reason that I had a party last night at my house was because I just finished a memoir. So I've just finished, 8 years of work on a memoir, and it's gone to the publishers yesterday. So we shall see.
Felicitats, doncs.
Thank you very much. Yes, it was, thank you so much. It was a huge job and I would never recommend it to anyone. It was excruciating.
Tanquem, si vols.
Sí. Molt bé.
Moltíssimes gràcies per venir, per assistir i doncs bé, confiem que us hagi agradat a tots.
Moltes gràcies.
Gràcies, Heather.
Gràcies.
Bé, moltíssimes gràcies, Àngels, Maria i la Heather, que la tenim aquí per estar tan, no la veieu però hi és, tan a prop, tot i ser tan lluny. Aquí acaba el MOT Girona, gràcies a tots per seguir-ho des de la sala, des de casa, però recordeu que el MOT és un projecte amb dues ciutats, és un sol projecte amb dues seus i per tant continuem dijous que ve. Us esperem a Olot presencialment o via pantalla. Gràcies.
Si us plau,